Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. How are you all doing out there? Are you struggling with being busy? Remember when tech promised us a 3-day week? Man, is it just me or are we busier than ever? And it feels like there's not enough hours in the day. And I find myself questioning if the world is actually spinning a little faster on its axis than normal because weeks, months, and even years are flying by. But I'm curious, do you ever feel that we've all replaced our work-life balance dreams with work-life integration? Because as many of us now work from home, we're often overcompensating and working 15 hours plus a day because we're always connected. And on that front, predictably, in 2021, many think that workplace burnout is going to hit epidemic proportions. But what does that mean for businesses in general? And how can lenders combat this? And how can we start to change this busy mindset that we often get lost in? So today I want to explore all that and learn more about the productivity paradox. So now, even though we have huge advances in technology, we don't seem to have made advances in productivity. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Tokyo in Japan, where Max Frenzel, co-author of the book Time Off, is going to join me on the podcast today and discuss the hustle of the constant connectivity and how it's creating this illusion that makes us feel productive and experience an immediate sense of accomplishment. But the reality is, we're actually not getting as much done as we might imagine. So let's get him on the podcast now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure, and thanks for having me on the show as well. So I'm Max Frenzel. My background originally is in quantum physics. I did my PhD in quantum information theory in London and did a postdoc at Tokyo University as well. But then I was a bit, bored is the wrong word, but I wanted to do something more applied and use my skills in the real world. So I ended up going into AI research and joined a couple of startups. I was working in AI startups for a while, and about 2 years ago, I think, I always had interest in creative stuff, and I made music and art. So I actually decided for a while to make AI and creativity and its applications to art and music my full-time job for a while. But quite recently, I stopped doing that again because I realized it's probably better to keep that as a hobby and just do it in my free time just for the fun of it. And quite recently, I became the R&D lead at a company called Bespoke in Tokyo. We make AI chatbots for the hospitality industry, so hotels, airports, that kind of thing. And besides all that, I'm also a writer, writing on all sorts of stuff, but I guess mainly AI, creativity, leadership, the future of work, those sort of topics. So that's very roughly, in a nutshell, who I am and what I do.
Incredibly cool. And I'm glad you mentioned the phrase, the future of work there, because I think at the moment, so many people are working from home at scale. And yes, technology promised us that 3-day week and greater flexibility, but it seems for most of us, we've replaced work-life balance with work-life integration. And there's a whole heap of problems that come with that. And you are the authors of the book Time Off. So can I begin by asking you to tell me the story behind the book and what inspired you to get that message out there?
Absolutely. So I wrote the book together with my co-author, John Fitch, who's not on the call today, unfortunately. But from my side, so when I was doing my PhD, I was incredibly lucky with the group I was in and the supervisors I had. They gave me really all the freedom I wanted. I could literally disappear for a couple of weeks without asking anyone for permission, and I was totally cool. But because of that freedom and because of all the time off I could take, I actually got a lot of stuff done. So I was co-founding a startup at the same time as well. I was running ultramarathons. I was doing all sorts of other stuff, but never did I really feel busy. It always just creative ideas came to me. I was working on a lot of creative side projects and it all just felt very natural. But then afterwards, when I joined startups, I realized very gradually that I was getting more and more busy and at the same time less and less productive, actually. And I remember I was living in Tokyo at the time. I was still living here, actually. And I was taking a slow weekend trip through the mountains. And there was a moment where I was sitting in like this beautiful old guest house overlooking the mountains. And it really hit me that never in my life had I felt this busy and at the same time so unproductive and uncreative. And that's kind of what got me thinking back to my PhD days and how different things were back then. And it made me think, okay, what's wrong? Like, how did things change and why do I feel that way? And just to process that for myself, I started writing about this topic and I published some articles. Initially, a couple of friends read it, but they became more and more popular. And eventually, through some random coincidences, John, my now co-author, found some of those articles. And turns out he was doing a podcast on the same topic at that time about like time off. He also had a transformative moment. He was like super type A personality, really driven, typical workaholic, until within 1 week, everything came crashing down. His startup failed, his girlfriend left him, and he had this moment where he started rethinking. So anyway, he invited me on the Time Off podcast, and we became friends from there on. And eventually, a couple of months, I guess, after we did the interview, I had an email in my inbox saying, hey, do you want to write a book together? And that's how it all started. And the funny thing is, actually, to this day, now we've published a book, it became an Amazon bestseller, and we still have not met in person yet. So we've been doing this whole thing remotely. And I think that's a really cool sign of what's possible through technology, actually. John is based in Austin, Texas. I'm based here in Tokyo, in Japan. And yeah, we've been spending hundreds of hours together doing this really, really big and important project to us, but we've not met in person.
Absolutely love that story. And you talked about strange coincidences there. I mean, although it is a very timely topic, or it would have been when you were writing this book, of course, the fact that vast majority of the world then went into lockdown and was working at home from scale is another coincidence there, isn't it?
Absolutely. It was quite timely. Like, we released the book in the middle of May, which was really the peak, or well, let's call it the first peak. We'll see how things go from here. But it was very timely in a way. And we talk about this concept called a rest ethic. Like, everyone knows what a work ethic is, but we want to popularize this term rest ethic and really make people think about rest ethic, because time off is not just like relaxation, is not just taking a break. It's actually something you need to be very conscious about, because otherwise it's just going to be drowned out by the work, especially if you're a driven type of person. And I think a lot of people now have noticed that they're really struggling with setting those boundaries, and it's really hurting them in so many different ways. At the same time, I think there's some people who've been doing amazing work in this time of lockdown. And I think those are the people who have a very well developed leisure life, and leisure in a sense that goes beyond, well, just relaxation, but it's actually people who have things that deeply care about and are deeply meaningful to them. So we talk about this in the book as well, but Aristotle defined leisure is something very different from rest. So in his hierarchy, rest was at the very bottom. It's something we do in order just to do more work, to recover, essentially. Then work was there as a necessary thing to support leisure. But leisure to him was really at the top of that hierarchy. And it was defined purely through things that give us meaning. So even though we might be doing something that to others looks like work, it can actually be deeply meaningful leisure activity to us. Like, for example, I think a lot of people are really into cooking, but those people who don't enjoy cooking, to them, that will look like terrible work. But if you really pull yourself into cooking an elaborate meal for your family, it might be hard work, but it's at the same time so leisurely, and it actually energizes you more. So rest can often be very active. And yeah, I think really during this lockdown time, those people who had a very strong rest ethic and who really could make this separation between work and meaningful leisure, they actually thrived in this time, and they wrote the books they finally wanted to write. I don't know, make those albums that they finally wanted to produce, thought about that business plan they wanted to do. All of this can actually count as leisure if it's really meaningful to you.
Absolutely. I think so many people suffered with those boundaries and that separation. And going into lockdown, everyone was going to learn a new language or write that book, but they couldn't because they kind of, in their work environment, because they wasn't used to working from home, I think a lot of people began overcompensating and not knowing when to switch off from that. And one of the reasons I invited you on the podcast today was after reading that in 2021, workplace burnout is expected to hit epidemic proportions. So what do you think that means for businesses in general, and how can leaders start combating this now so we can start to change that business mindset? Because it really does, there is a need for that change, isn't there?
Absolutely. I think it's one of the biggest issues we're facing. And I don't think we've really appreciating yet just how big of an issue it is. I mean, burnout has only very, very recently actually been recognized as a serious and like proper health issue. And I think so many people are now realizing, or slowly at least starting to think about burnout. I think the definitions of burnout are something like feelings of energy depletion and exhaustion, an increased mental distance from one's job, feelings of negativism, cynicism, and those sort of things, and also just reduced energy and productivity. And I think a lot of people, when they think about these things now, reflect on that might sound very scarily familiar in a way. And I think as businesses or business leaders or creatives of any type, actually knowledge workers of any type, we really have to take this seriously. And burnout is only at the very, very extreme of that scale. But I think we just need to get rid of this mindset that busy equals productivity, right? And busyness is often actually the very opposite of productivity, especially for us knowledge workers. Now, I spent most of my career so far in AI, and a lot of people are worried about AI taking away their jobs and those kind of things. And yes, I think AI is going to change the job landscape dramatically, but I'm not too worried about that, because no matter busyness, that's really the thing AI is going to be good at. So if you pride yourself in busyness, you might want to rethink. No one's going to out-busy AI, no matter how much time they put in. But I really take that as something positive, because it means if you can actually focus on creativity and empathy, those skills will remain human for a very, very long time, and we can really benefit from that. I think so much of what knowledge workers are doing right now is just valueless, busy work, essentially. But what we should actually be doing are these creative things and focusing on the human-to-human interaction. I guess the creativity part is sort of hopefully obvious for most companies who think of themselves as innovative. The empathy part, I'm not sure if it's quite that obvious, but I mean, everyone probably knows a terrible leader who's very short-tempered, doesn't really listen. That person is often exactly the same, who prides themselves on how little sleep they need, how busy they are, how they're grinding things out. So I think that's kind of one of the things people probably can relate to quite easily. But I think there's also another component, actually. So working on chatbots, I had to realize that no one actually wants a chatbot. And similarly, as an author, I had to realize that no one actually wants to buy a book or really cares about your ideas. What people do want and care about is what those things can do for them and how they make them feel. And I think understanding that as business leaders, as authors, as creatives of any kind, that requires empathy. And empathy requires us to take a step back and reflect and putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. And in that way, busyness and empathy are almost mutually exclusive. So I think we really need to focus on that. So I think it's a very, very long-winded answer to your question. But yes, burnout is hurting us. Burnout is a serious condition. People are suffering from that. But I think that's only the very tip of the iceberg, because we're losing so much of actual, genuine productivity below that, because we're so focused on busyness and not investing enough in creativity and empathy.
And on that subject of productivity, for anyone that's not heard of this, can you just tell them a little bit more about the productivity paradox and how even though we have huge advances in technology at our disposal and a long list of tools, we don't actually seem to have had any advances in productivity, do we?
Yeah, it's quite shocking, actually. Like, I'm based in Japan here, and like a lot of people think of Japan as this extremely productive nation, but it turns out Japan is extremely productive when it comes to manufacturing. But when it comes to knowledge work, we're so far behind pretty much any other developed country because we pride ourselves, and Japan prides itself so much in its busyness, its culture of visible busyness. And I think that's actually one of the big issues, this visible busyness. So I think, again, we often confuse productivity with busyness. And this paradox of productivity, which is alluded to. So I think historically it was very easy to measure productivity. In factory work, like how many widgets did you produce today? Okay, that's your productivity, very easy. But for a knowledge worker, it's just not easy to actually define what productivity really means. And for a creative worker, it's very difficult to define or quantify productivity. And because we don't have any clear metrics to measure that, we often default to this visible busyness. So we think, to convince other people that we're actually productive and getting stuff done, we have to be visibly busy. We have to be the person who CCs in half the company on the email just to show them, hey, look at me, I'm busy, I'm working, like I'm sharing information, I'm doing stuff. But often that's exactly the opposite of productivity. And so our pursuit of productivity, in a way, because we got this metric wrong, we're so focused on this visible busyness, is actually hurting our productivity in the long run.
And burnout, like you said a few moments ago, can sneak up and take you down when you least expect it. So you mentioned a few symptoms a moment ago, such as lack of energy, cynicism, lack of focus, or around your work there, or indeed interest around it. But can you tell me a little bit more about the kind of signs for anyone listening, that what they should be looking out for?
Yeah, I think with a lot of these things, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem in a way, because you actually have to take time off to really realize how much you need the time off. Like, you need to sit down and reflect to really realize how, like, what big of an impact it actually has on you. So I guess if you're feeling a general lack of energy, lack of motivation, if you just, unsatisfied with what you're doing, despite having a seemingly enjoyable job, for example, if you're a driven person, you actually think you're in the right track, but somehow you just feel something's not right. And also often a sign of burnout is that you're still getting the big stuff done, you're still getting the important things done, but small errands can completely paralyze you. Like, I don't know, sending some mail or doing your laundry or replying to some really simple emails. So it's this kind of weird situation where you really, you're kind of high functioning workaholic. You still get the big stuff done, but you're stuck on these very, very simple things and they really paralyze you. That's also a very key sign of burnout. And I think in general, I'd recommend anyone who's just slightly worried that they're suffering from that, or in any way is concerned that it might be them, take some time, even just a couple of minutes, and sit down free from distractions with a notebook and actually reflect on the situation. So it's really, this reflection is so key, and you really need to take some time out to recognize how important this time out is for you.
And how can we improve our rest ethic, and what small actions can we all implement into our daily routines to try and combat that, should we see any of those symptoms arising?
So the book is really full of many, many different ways of how to approach that. And we also, I guess, one key thing we really want to stress, we don't believe that there's a one-size-fits-all approach for just that fits anyone. So we really wanted to look at as many different people as possible and share their stories and share their practical advice. And then anyone can go in and try them for themselves, see what works for them, and really just keep what really is meaningful to them. Some of them are even contradictory in a way. And the people we profile in the book range from Roman emperors to current CEOs, leaders of some of the largest companies in the world, to the regular guy down somewhere in the corporate hierarchy, to artists, everything in between. But In general, maybe a few things I can point to is, I think right now, especially with so many of us in lockdown, working remotely, I think the boundaries between work and rest and family time and free time have blurred a lot. So I'd recommend becoming a bit more conscious of those boundaries and setting them more strictly in a way, especially right now. So it can be something simple, like if you used your commute to sort of delineate, okay, work stops here, rest starts there, and you use the commute in between to sort of have this as a boundary, make a little ritual. Just, okay, even if you're staying in the same place, even if you're staying at home, have a little work end ritual, something you do that clearly marks the end of the workday. And then you actually stick with that. You don't look at emails afterwards anymore. You don't check Slack, whatever. Actually have those clear boundaries. And again, I think reflection in general and self-awareness is so important with that. So that's another big thing I would recommend to everyone. Just more often actually sit down with a notebook and journal. And I know it's not easy. I struggled for a very long time getting into journaling. And basically the thing that made it work for me in the end was to make it as simple as possible. So it can be, have a phrase or a question you ask yourself, and then just answer like in a single sentence at the beginning, and then just keep repeating that day after day. And then if you feel like it, actually write a little bit more, and slowly you get into the habit. So I think that's a nice thing. Also, I'd really recommend everyone to schedule your leisure in your calendar and protect it as much as you would a work meeting. Because again, it all ends up blurring into each other. And especially now that we're doing those things in the same place, work tends to crowd out the leisure activities. So really put it in your calendar and protect it. It's not something that just happens when we find some free time. We need to make free time for it. And maybe one more, it comes from a profile in the book that I really like. It's Hermann Hesse. He was a German novelist, and he did many wonderful things. He wrote many wonderful books, but what we distill from his knowledge is what we now call time off microdosing. So he said something like, someone who for the first time picks up a flower on his way to work makes a big step towards joy. So we often, when we think about time off, we think of big, long vacations, or I don't know, it's just very grand things, very big things. But it can be those small things, like just pause for a couple of seconds to look at a flower, or take a note of something that puts a smile on your face. And actually, if you're getting good at those things, then you can start to really enjoy those bigger things even more. Because otherwise they often leave you even more hollow in a way afterwards if you can't appreciate those small things. And it's also just such a great countermeasure against burnout, I think, just appreciating the little things. And again, I really recommend taking a note. Like whenever you see something that puts a smile on your face, write it down. It really helps to make it stick.
Love that. And I'm curious, overall, do you think this culture of hustle and constant connectivity that we all experience is almost creating an illusion that makes us feel productive and then experience this immediate sense of accomplishment? But it kind of fools us somewhat, because the reality is we're actually not getting as much done as we think we are. Is that something that you see?
Totally. And I think it comes again down to this visible busyness idea. Like so much of what we do is just performing busyness. It's literally performance for other people. And there's also this terrible feeling of guilt we have associated to it. Like at the beginning of the book, we talk about the history of work and leisure and how we actually ended up forgetting the value of leisure, because in ancient times, it was really the highest thing people could aspire to. And Bertrand Russell said it, the leisure class was the people who really built civilization, made the big contributions to society. And now, thanks to technology, we could all be part of this leisure class and could contribute to society through our creativity, through our empathy, through our big breakthrough ideas. But because we feel this guilt of like not being busy and not being constantly working, grinding things out, we're wasting so much of our potential and so much of our productivity. But I'd encourage everyone to think about your busiest days and ask yourself, are those really the days where you feel most accomplished in the end? I highly doubt it. I mean, for myself, it's often days that actually feel surprisingly easy and where I didn't put in too many hours in a way. But because of that, the quality of the things I've done was just so much higher. And I think with work, it often it's not cumulative or additive in a way, not in a linear way, like in the sense that if you put in 2 hours at 50%, that's nowhere near the same as putting in 1 hour at 100% of focus. But I think so many of us are just at like, I don't know, 20, 25%, but then try and compensate for it with long hours and grinding it out because we feel guilty for stepping away from it. But I really encourage people to, well, concentrate in a way, try to like be fully on and fully engaged when you're actually doing work. But then on the other hand, try to step fully away and be fully detached when you're not working.
And in a not too distant future, everyone's saying that artificial intelligence and automation are going to begin to engulf the workplace and replace a lot of that routine and busy work. And although a lot of people will say that, yes, traditional skills and traditional roles will disappear, but I do think there is a counter argument here where you're actually setting employees free from those repetitive and mundane and almost robotic tasks by letting the machine take care of them. So with that in mind, what new skills do you think employees will need to cultivate to remain relevant and useful in the workplace?
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said. Like AI and automation and all these other technologies, they will take away a lot of the routine work and the busy work, but that will free up humans to actually really focus on what matters. And I think the key skills there that will remain human for a very, very long time are creativity and empathy. And in one of my previous jobs, I was leading the development of a product that basically helped financial analysts to get insights into news articles. So they often had to go through tons of news articles to write reports and find the relevant information to them. And it was really a very tedious task. With the product we developed for them, they could cut that time by 90%, which means they could have 90% more time to spend in something that actually makes them an expert and really see the bigger connections and really be creative. Similarly, if I think of hospitals, like so often a modern hospital can feel basically like a conveyor belt. You're really running from station to station, and the doctor just checks that you're within some sort of standard interval of something and then hands you off to the next person. But they're just too busy, right? But now imagine a hospital of the future where a lot of the admin work, a lot of this tedious busy work is taken away from those experts, and they can really focus on this human connection and understanding their patient and also being creative. Like AI and deep learning, which is really the biggest part of what people talk about when they talk about AI these days. But at its heart is really nothing but statistical analysis. It's a very, very sophisticated form of statistical analysis, but it's still just statistical analysis looking through huge amounts of data. So by definition, this will only find averages and means, even though they're very smart. But it will never find the creative outliers. And creativity is always in those outliers and in connecting those distant dots. Also, our AI right now is what we call narrow AI. So it's very, very good at very specific tasks, but it doesn't generalize to other things. And I think as humans, we can really use this as tools to help us in those very specific tasks, but then combine them in completely new ways. And I think also for people to be have more job stability in the future, I think one thing that's going to be key is focusing a little bit on breadth over depth, because that allows us to use these different AI tools, but connect them in different ways. And as the speed of the change increases, it allows us to really stay more flexible in a way. And it just allows us to be more creative.
And looking to the future for yourself, what's next for you? Is there anything else you can share about the road ahead and indeed your big focus over the next 18 months?
Yeah, so we really just launched a book, and we're still at the very beginning of promoting that and getting it into people's hands. And we're so proud of the results. So now it's really just a matter of actually sharing it with people. And yeah, we're still at the very beginning of that. But we do already think about workshops and seminars and giving talks. Now, the current situation has changed that landscape quite a bit, so we'll have to see how that turns out. But The book is really, in a way, for everyone, and everyone can find something useful in it. But who we really had in mind when we wrote it, or who we really want to reach, are business leaders and cultural leaders, people who can really have a big impact on the lives and the work quality of other people. So we will focus on those groups in the future, HR professionals, business leaders, and really try and work with them to, shape the future of work and make it a bit more balanced and allow everyone to really focus on creativity and empathy and find more joy in their life again. So we're happy to work with companies on that, and we're thinking of different directions of how to approach that. And then also, I think in a very long term, we don't have anything too concrete in that direction yet, but what we actually want to look into is, can we use technology to support time off? Because John and I, we really believe in technology. I mean, it can be very distracting and can also be very counter to time off. But if you use it in the right way, it can be used to support really high quality leisure. And we want to think about, can we actually develop some tools that can help people with, developing their rest ethic, essentially. So that's something we're thinking about in the long term.
Fantastic. And I'm conscious we've covered a lot of ground today. And for anyone listening that wants to find out more about your book, or maybe even contacting you personally, what's the best way of doing that?
Well, the book is on Amazon and also should be available from any local bookstore. You should be able to order it from there. The title is Time Off, a practical guide to building your rest ethic and finding success without the stress. You can also find it on our website, timeoffbook.com. And if you're interested in contacting me directly, you can find me on my website. That's maxfrenzel.com.
Excellent. Well, I'll add those links to the show notes just so people can find you nice and easily. And there's so much I've loved chatting with you about today. And just towards the end of our conversation, the talk about AI and automation actually setting us free from a robotic existence where we're performing repetitive and mundane tasks for far too long. And ironically, it's this technology that's going to help us get back to being more human and honing skills such as creativity, empathy, strategy, management, social skills, leadership. It's all that kind of stuff that we've almost forgot about over the years with our obsession with tech. So getting back to that would be a great thing. But a big thank you for sharing that story with me today.
My pleasure. And I think it's really time that we hand this busyness baton back to the robots.
Taking time off isn't about extravagant vacations, although they are pretty nice, aren't they? But it is really about finding small ways to take breaks throughout every day, not just 2 weeks of the year. So a big thank you to Max for providing tips on how to improve our rest ethic and a few small actions that we might be able to implement in our daily routine. And now that some of us are working from home for the first time, it can be challenging to find that work-life balance. But I want to know about your struggles with replacing work-life balance with work-life integration and always being online and so much more. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. And you can send me a DM on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. Just look for @NeilC.Hughes. I'm curious what kind of messages I'm going to get on this one, because I think it is a universal problem that we're all fighting. But please let me know how you are. And if you've got any mind hacks or life hacks, I want to hear them too. But it's time for me to go and work on my rest ethic. So I might have a lie down for 10 minutes. But when I arise from my slumber, we will do it all again tomorrow. So a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.